Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to the 22nd episode of the 11th season of the Tom Petty Project podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Brown. This is the weekly podcast that digs into the entire Tom Petty catalogue song by song, album by album, and includes conversations with musicians, fans, and people connected with Tom along the way. Last week's episode looked at the beautiful instrumental piece Hope on Board, and as I sort of expected, there weren't too many comments, but we did have a few. So, Jack McNay left the following note. Luminous, like the ones REM would occasionally sprinkle in. It says as much in no words as it would with words. An instrumental spiritual sibling to Cat Stevens' Peace Train, one has the feeling of boarding out on a morning flight towards hope, rising above the states of mournfulness and the bombed-out remains of the old ways, leaving the past behind, spreading one's wings, and taking a chance that things go better than before. To quote Neil Young, the train of love is rolling by. I reached over and touched your hand. Or Huckleberry Finn's rolling of the dice on a better way with, all right then, I'll go to hell. Definitely a solid 8 out of 10. Well, great work there, Jack. Throwing in what? Neil Young, Cat Stevens, and Mark Twain, and a little bit of your own linguistic flair. I like the idea that idea of boarding out on a morning flight towards hope. That's a great visual. My executive producer, Paul Roberts, said, congratulations, Kev. I think you need a medal turning a 78 seconds instrumental into a thoroughly entertaining 18 minutes 20 pod. Great mood music, and lovely to hear the late John Mahoney on the film clip. Well, thanks, Paul. I did wonder when I was doing last week's episode how long it would end up being, but it turned out that I did manage to find a few things to say about the song. And I agree, I absolutely love John Mahoney, and especially in Frasier. But anytime I've seen him turn up in a TV show or a movie, he's always good, and I've always enjoyed his work. And I didn't actually realize that he was born in Blackpool before emigrating to the US at 18 and deliberately losing his English accent so he didn't stand out when he joined the US military. A little bit of trivia for you there. Could have used that in my petty trivia, couldn't I? Damn it. Over on Instagram, Lisa Kelly Pennington is having a great season guessing my ratings. She commented, I was nervous going into this one since it's an instrumental and I wasn't sure how rating it would work. Since I still haven't watched the movie, your consideration of its placement in the film didn't calm my nerves, but you explained it clearly enough that I'm now 9, 1, and 1. Also, thanks for the encouragement. I'll get started on my Dylan-esque debut album right away. And hey, Lisa, look, if you need a producer for this avant-garde project, do let me know. At Couples Rob left a note unrelated to the song, but it's, it's as Heartbreakers adjacent as you can possibly get. And they said, just wanted to mention I saw Ben Mont last night at the Carlisle. Amazing performance in an intimate room that held less than 100 people. I sat front row and got to enjoy 4 new tracks off his new album that haven't been released. The highlight, however, was his playing of Straight Into Darkness, absolutely jaw-dropping. He also referred to Tom as the Baron of Gainesville, which was funny. And man, Straight Into Darkness by Ben Mont just on piano? Yeah, definitely not jealous of that at all. Wow. I was hoping that he might announce 1 or 2 dates, eventually a little closer to me, and maybe he will. But keep your fingers crossed for that. I really ought to pluck up the courage to invite him on the show to talk about his new album, and of course pick his brain about his time in the Heartbreakers. Maybe I'll do that this week. You know what? Nothing to lose, eh? All I can say is no. Anyway, thanks for all your wonderful comments as always. Let's get into Walls for the second time this season. This is Walls number 3. As I sit down to write this week's episode, I'm faced with that unusual situation of having to talk about a song that I've already talked about. Now, this will be happening a lot more once we get past season 20 and start circling back to B-sides, outtakes, archive releases, all those types of things. And I already mentioned that we won't be talking about Angel Dream twice, so this is going to be a first for me. And because of that, I had to decide how I wanted to approach this one. The chord progression is the same. Basically, the lyrics are almost identical, save for one small change. And aside from the elongated outro in the Circus version, the length is, if that outro wasn't there, the length would be pretty similar. So I will be doing my usual run through the music, but I'll probably end up talking in comparison at the same time. So I guess we'll see how it goes. Now, if you remember, Ed Burns, the director of the movie, had asked Tom for a second version of this song because he wanted to open and close the movie with it, but obviously wanted different takes on the material. I talked last week about how brilliantly Hope on Board fits that final scene of She's the One and transitions into Walls number 3 as the end credits music. And it's fairly obvious that the version we're talking about today is how the song was written originally. And I find it fascinating that Tom got to the Circus version from this version. In terms of why it works for the movie, obviously She's the One was a major studio release, even though it was a small budget, and Circus feels a lot more Hollywood. At the start of the movie, there's a lot of sparks flying, a lot of things happening, and threads and plot lines have begun, and knots and tangles start to form or be revealed. But by the end of the movie, the Fitzpatrick men, they sort of find a simpler, more honest and straightforward tempo to their lives, and so the simpler, more stripped back version of the song works perfectly. Start big, end wistful. In that sense, the production choices on both versions are simply spot on. The song begins, or this version begins, with a lovely, clean electric guitar in both left and right channels. The left channel is playing the main chord progression, with the part in the right channel just playing, it's kind of like pairs of notes. And it's mixed down really quite low in that right channel, but it gives you this, it almost feels like an echo in your head, but it's just because of the panning. Where the intro to Circus is 4 bars, we have a much tighter 2 bars here. And with this version being 18 beats per minute faster than Circus 2, we get into the meat of the song and that fabulous opening line in just 4 seconds. The 4th beat of the last of those 2 intro bars is punctuated by a single snare hit from Kurt Biscara, leading us into the full arrangement. And this is one of those Heartbreakers clinics in how to keep things simple and take as much out as possible to leave only the bare essentials needed to make the song work. There is, as always, that wonderful interplay between Tom and Mike on the guitars, with Mike, I always assume it's Mike in the left channel, playing that beautiful, bright, ringing guitar. And it's kind of playing the strumming pattern in, it's not quite double time, but it's almost double time, while the part in the right is much simpler and mainly almost in rhythmic counterpoint to Mike's part, but it's sort of just accenting off the beats that Mike isn't hitting. It's all, as you would expect, beautifully balanced. We have the bass playing a very simple part that does add a little movement under what is a fairly straight backbeat on the drums. And if I have one very tiny slight complaint about the mix on this song, it's that the bass is ever so slightly buried. I think it could have been brought up just a wee bit. Now, that's not going to affect my score for this song at the end, though. I'll just say that right now. Tom's vocal here is much less character-driven, with him singing in what I tend to think of as his most natural voice. The Walls version is big and bombastic, and Tom sings that version with a degree of theatricality and swagger that is completely absent, well, for obvious reasons, on this simpler cut. We do also get that slight twist on the lyrics in this first verse. On Circus, Tom sings, "And if I never do nothing, I'll get you back someday." Whereas for this version, he sings, "I'm coming back someday." There's a brashness to the former and less certainty in the latter. And I'd love to know if Tom deliberately changed that line in the rocked out Circus version to set the stage for one of the characters rather than the other. There's a directness to the phrase, "I will get you back." I'll get you back. I will get you back, which isn't there in the phrase, "I'm coming back." And the two brothers in the movie have very different personalities, with one being very self-confident to the point of being somewhat egotistical, with the other being a little more at sea in life and not really quite being sure where he's headed. So this change to one line captures the difference between the two men rather well. And so, like I say, I really, really wonder if that was deliberate. If so, genius. The next difference is the transition between the verse and the chorus. On Circus, this is marked with a big stop before the layered harmony vocals come back in. With the number 3 version, the drums play straight through without a fill, just a crash cymbal on the 1 of the first chorus bar. We also have a much simpler harmony part, just one part here, and I'm fairly certain that this is Tom doubling himself rather than Howie singing that second part with him. There's also a double-time tambourine being shaken and mixed into the left channel to add a little more energy to this section and make it slightly more distinct from the verses instrumentally or percussively. There's a nice little double snare hit to lead us back into verse 2, and here we have Benmont's organ part being mixed really low, but it just adds in a bit of warmth and a bit of color to this next verse, and we do get that then throughout the song. After the line that holds in the pain in this second verse, we also get a wonderful little guitar lick in the right channel that has a big flanger effect on it and is almost it's kind of like a nod or a slight inclination of the head back to the Circus version. It flirts around the edges of surreality in its tone before drifting away on the musical wind, before coming back in after Sometimes You Cry and Half of Me is Ocean. So we get those nice little licks coming in, but they're very simple and, again, very tasteful, but they've got that sort of slightly bigger, slightly more circusy theatrical tone to them. And man, I think I must have talked about this on the first episode, that couplet, "Half of me is ocean, half of me is sky." I think that's sometimes my favorite line Tom ever wrote. Sometimes. Depending on my mood, it just elates and lifts me. And I think I talked about this on the Circus episode. It's just that abstract quality to it. Even though it doesn't really scan literally, emotionally, or sort of, philosophically, you know exactly what he's talking about. Half of you is weighted down and anchored to the earth, but half of you soars into the heavens. You can take it as a spiritual line or a creative reference to the artist and their art. The artist is grounded. The artist is sort of out there in the ether. You can take it as a metaphor for all manner of things, but it doesn't matter what angle you approach it from because it retains this incredible sense of grandeur almost that makes it stand out. We then hear Tom say solo, and you can tell he's not standing right next to the mic when he says this. I don't think he's actually saying this to be used. I think it's, maybe it was captured as the band was laying down the rough bed tracks of the song. And when they were mixing the final product, someone thought, you know what? That'll sound really cool if we leave that in. So, solo. We get a wonderful, tasteful harmonica solo from Tom this time. It's got a little distortion applied to it and a really flat reverb to give it a very raw edge that really cuts through the slick, dreamlike quality of the rest of the instrumentation and the mix. It's a super little arrangement decision, and I wonder if it's a super little arrangement decision, and I do wonder if there's a version of this song somewhere or a take somewhere where Mike plays a lead guitar solo. I do honestly think there's a ton of material from these sessions that must be kicking around in tape cans somewhere in the archives, and man, hopefully one day we get to hear all of it. Alrighty, folks, it's time for some petty trivia. Your question from last week was this. On 2021's re-release of She's the One, titled Angel Dream, which additional cover song was included as part of the 12 tracks on that album? Is it 5 Years by David Bowie, 13 Days by J.J. Cale, 8 Days a Week by the Beatles, or 16 Tons by Tennessee Ernie Ford? Well, the Heartbreakers were obviously known as one of the greatest rock and roll cover bands of all time, as well as being just one of the straight-up best originals rock and roll bands of all time, too. But we're not talking about live covers, really. We're talking about recordings. And I think that Tom and the band would have done an absolutely kick-ass job of the brilliant 16 Tons. Imagine Tom drawling, "You load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt," with Benmont wailing on the organ and Mike making that Telecaster just sing. The boys did cover I Need You and I Want to Hold Your Hand a handful of times by the Beatles, including the latter being one of the two songs that they performed at the concert for George. 8 Days a Week, however, was never covered live or in the studio by the band that I know of. And 5 Years by David Bowie would also have been a really interesting one to hear the Heartbreakers cover because, A, it's just a fantastic song, and I think that if the band had recorded this one during the Mojo era, they could have done something really cool with it. So that means your answer for this week is, of course, 13 Days. 13 Days opens J.J. Cale's fifth, I almost said John Cale then, totally different artist, opens J.J. Cale's fifth album titled 5. The original is shorter than Tom's version, with the latter featuring a superb slide guitar part from Mike Campbell. I'm looking forward to talking about this one too once we circle back around to the Angel Dream repackaging. It's one of the all-time great road songs, really, isn't it? Your question for this week is this. Which song did Tom and the Heartbreakers cover the most times live in concert? Is it A, Handle with Care by the Traveling Wilburys, B, So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star by the Byrds, C, Oh Well by Fleetwood Mac, or D, Shout by the Isley Brothers? Okay, back to the song. The solo gives way to another wonderful verse. Some things are over, some things go on. Part of me you carry, part of me is gone. And again, fabulous as a standalone lyric, but so wonderfully appropriate for the end of this movie. We also have a very slight change on the first line of this next chorus in the delivery as Tom drags the word you in "You Got a Heart So Big" rather than punching it as "you got." So it's "you got" rather than "you got." Just a very small, simple change, but enough to transition us into the tail end of this song. We also have the harmonica filling in some of the spaces in the arrangement. We then have the chorus one more time with the harmonies and the harmonica and the organ before we end on a last chord on the guitar, bass, harmonica, and cymbal crash on the root chord. 3 minutes and 4 seconds of absolute pop perfection. Long-time listeners of this podcast will know that when I wrote one of my 10 questions, which version of Walls do you prefer, I was quite astounded to find that most people picked Circus. And I've since talked about the fact that I definitely listened to that one way more than I ever did before I started this podcast. But I gotta tell you, I think number 3 is still ever so slightly ahead of Circus for me. The harmonica solo and the really raw, stripped down arrangement still carries an emotional weight for me that the big, bold, multi-layered approach on Circus just doesn't. I've also definitely talked about my very favourite version being the live cut from the PBS special recording with Scott Thurston singing those exceptional harmonies. The version on the Fillmore 97 release is also really sweet, with Howie playing a very, very cool bass part on that one, and Benmont's organ part being a little bit more expressive and a little bit more prominent. And I'll leave links to all 4 versions of the song that I've talked about in this episode in the episode notes for you. Okay, Pettyheads, that's it for this week. I don't think I've ever hidden or tried to hide the fact that Walls is one of my very favourite Tom Petty compositions. I think it's essentially a perfect song. It's lean, it's tight. If you take anything out, it suffers. If you add anything in, it suffers. So I think in that way, like I say, it's a perfect song. And this version is, as I say, an exercise in showing how to simplify and condense an idea and an arrangement to be as tight as you can make it without losing 1 ounce of its beauty. It should come as no surprise that this version of Walls, like the version that leads off the album, is a rock solid 10 out of 10. The Tom Petty Project is a proud member of the Deep Dive Podcast Network. Go check us out at deepdivepodcastnetwork.com. Loads of great shows there, loads of great people doing them. You can also check out my other podcast, Seaside Pod Review, a Queen podcast that I do with my very best friend, Randy Woods, as well as The Ultimate Catalog Clash that I co-host with my great pal, Corey Morissette, who is making me listen this season to artists such as Kiss, Motley Crue, Quiet Riot, and Def Leppard. Folks, I know there's going to be a lot of Def Leppard fans out there among you. I'm just not one of them. But you should go check that out. We're having a lot of fun talking about albums from 1983. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and YouTube at The Tom Petty Project, and on Blue Sky at Tom Petty Project. Go follow, like, subscribe as applicable, and again, please leave a review or a rating if you haven't already done that. Keep talking to me on social media, and I'll keep reading out your comments on the show. And as your weekly reminder, The Tom Petty Project is not affiliated with the Tom Petty estate in any way. So when you're looking for Tom's music, please go buy some. Go buy it from local businesses. Don't go to Amazon. Don't go to, Sunrise Records or whatever the equivalent is down there in the States. Go buy from one of your independent local record sellers. Or, you could go to all the streaming platforms and stream it too. But just, go buy some music, folks. If you're looking for official merchandise, go to tompetty.com. And if you're looking for merchandise for this show, go to tompettyproject.com. Don't forget to check out the Tom Petty Nation and Tom Petty Fans Forever groups on Facebook. And make sure you check out Tom Petty Radio on Channel 31 on Sirius XM. Until we meet again next week, keep listening to and sharing Tom's music. Try to be kind. Try to say I love you to someone at least once a day. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll be back with you next week to talk about the penultimate and longest song on this album, Hung Up and Overdue. Bye-bye.